Hello again, beautiful people, and thank you so much for joining us for another session of this very special event, The Sacred Wound as a Portal to Your Awakening, Embracing the Dark Night of the Soul. My name is Charlie Giles, and I am honoured to be your host for this very powerful wisdom sharing event, including speakers from all over the globe, joining us to offer their stories and their gifts that they have received from embracing their own sacred wounds. Before we begin today's session, I would like to do an acknowledgement to country, which is an Australian Aboriginal custom for when two or more people come together. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we are meeting on today and thank them for their continued custodianship of the many lands, seas and waters that we have between us. I would also like to acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, and thank them for their guidance and wisdom that they continuously provide for us. Thank you. Well, in today's session, we are talking to Kedar Brown on the topic of the initiatory descent into the well of memory, healing, and belonging. What a topic. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Kedar. He is the founder and director of the Rites of Passage Council, an organisation offering nature immersion ceremonial encampments around the world. He is an internationally known ceremonialist, healer, intuitive, and teacher of psychological and spiritual awareness with over 35 years of professional experience. Over this time, Kedar has developed an effective and unique approach to emotional and spiritual healing by braiding together his depth of clinical knowledge of experiential psychotherapies with more nature-based Indigenous wisdom teachings and healing methods from around the world. In 1994, he apprenticed with Stephen Foster and Meredith Little at the School of Lost Borders in the Sierra Nevada mountains in the form and process of the Vision Quest ceremony and eco-psychology. He has also apprenticed for many years with Malidoma Somé, PhD, initiated elder and shaman of the Dagara tribe of Burkina Faso in West Africa, learning Indigenous methods of healing emotional trauma and relationship challenges through various forms of ritual processes and intuitive readings. Okay, so please join me in welcoming our guest today, Kedar Brown. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Charlie. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited about where this conversation is going to go with you, with as the topic being what it is. I think the best place for us to start would be what really makes a wound sacred.
So the sacredness of the wound. When I hear the word wound, I think immediately of the word womb as the birthing ground, that which holds the story that's getting ready to unfold. And because we live in at least in a culture of modernity where there's such fascination with spirituality and spiritual bypass and going towards the light and feeling good and the addiction to immediate gratification, that there's this tendency to remythologize the dark into something to avoid. Even in many of our fairy tales we grew up with, it's like to go into the woods was like that was not a good thing when listened to on the surface, but when you understand it mythologically, it did represent to go into the wound, the dark, the woods, the night was all about entering the unknown. And the good thing about the unknown is that once you enter the unknown, everything then becomes possible. Because once the journey is known, everything else is not possible. It's like it becomes singularly focused. So the wound as sacred, at least in my mind, takes me back more ancestrally, say to my Irish Celtic ancestry, where before time was measured by day and celebrated by sun, it was measured by night. And interesting to consider that, we place the beginning of a cycle at January 1st, at least in our hemisphere up here. And we have this identified date that's very disconnected from the cosmologies of nature and of Earth. And we think of, well, that's the beginning. The beginning is this period on whatever date, you know, in this hemisphere, we say January 1st or New Year's Day. But before we measured time by day, we measured by night. And there are still numerous unbroken lineages of village activity and life whose beginnings don't coincide with the light. Actually, they begin, again, we'll talk in this hemisphere since we're in different hemispheres, but they would begin like here at the end of October, which is when we enter on this side of the planet, we enter into the dark. And so this entering into the dark marked the beginning. And so when we think of the wound and we think of difficulty and we think of, you know, what many call the dark night of the soul, like all these mythic and symbolic references to dark and wound and difficulty, and we forget that that was the breeding ground of new beginnings. That was the dream time, as you call it down there. The night, the dark, was when we entered into the dreaming. And out of the dreaming came the stories and the songs that then followed. So this different way of looking at wound and night and dark and difficulty is actually a beginning place. On when I was creating our website, our Rites of Passage Council website, I decided to put right across the front page, great journeys begin in darkness. And it's a indicator that this tendency to avoid the wound, as if it needs fixing, as opposed to, so we tend to pathologize the wound and then go about trying to fix it and eliminate the symptoms it causes in our functional lives in a very dysfunctional culture often. And yet the wound is there to activate and call our attention to healing and reconciliation and belonging and ancestry. And although they can feel very personal, that the type of wounding we may be called to attend to, or that rises up in our psyche sometimes after many years, and maybe a certain developmental stage we enter, and there it is. It comes out of the dark. It comes out of our bloodlines, out of our ancestry, and emerges into our individual consciousness, or through a particular story that we've carried in our lives from our own biographical imprints, but yet have ancestral roots. And so these things emerge and often create havoc and trouble in our psyches and in our trying to maintain our lives. But the other thing that makes the wound sacred is that it calls us into a life, into a way of belonging, into our own medicine. And it is really unconcerned with the comforts of the life we've created. It has no regard for that. Matter of fact, there's a wonderful teacher named, I think her name's Carolyn Mace, that said, when you call upon the will of heaven, heaven comes, but heaven has no regard for your physical comfort. But when you call upon the gods and the goddesses, they show up. Or as I like to say, when your world is shaking all around you, and you go to your ancestors and pray for support and guidance, and you find out that they're doing the shaking. So it's this almost paradoxical turn towards the night, my friend. Turn towards the dark. Turn towards the wound. Don't seek to pathologize your experience. Seek to find a guide, an elder, who can help you navigate the territory without seeing that there's not looking at it as if there's something wrong with you. And when we look at mythologically, we notice that what you're in is actually what I call a soul descent. And I think, like the title of the conversation that I gave this one, this idea of descending into water, like in mythology, whenever there's a descent into water, what we automatically know is there's a descent into memory, into healing, into reconciliation, into ancestry. And often in these stories, there's encounters down at the bottom of the water with something that looks challenging but carries great wisdom. And when we turn towards that which appears challenging, we're able to access the wisdom, the gold. They say when we say the gold or the gift is within the wound. I guess I would go one step further. I wouldn't say it's just in the wound. I would say that your particular wounding that you have experienced in your life are the activating storylines that activate the medicine that you carry. And these wounds that may feel personal, I guarantee you will have ancestral threads of connection, so that if we've been on the planet long enough, we've had those moments when our grief all of a sudden feels like this wave moves through us, and it feels way bigger than my personal grief, or my anger feels way bigger than my personal anger. And it's like we tap into these ancestral bloodlines of unacknowledged, hungry ghosts that are moving through the line, seeking healing, seeking expression. And therefore, when we turn towards the wound, the healing work we do becomes a sweet elixir, or a sacred language, or a holy dance that is offered to our ancestors, and also offered down the line forwards as something of an offering, our own wound tending. And so this, and I would almost say, I would venture to say most all mythologies and all stories, when there's an encounter with dark, with difficulty, that to go into it is where one accesses the gift. One awakens the memory of the medicine they carry, or they came into this world to deliver. However, if you avoid the wound, then there's this compulsive nature to run and to take on the mythologies, if you will, of modernity, which are about better and less than. And consumer cultures feed you a mythology that convince you that there's some place for you to get to, or something for you to acquire that will make it all good. And the truth is, there is one of my old teachers, Carlos Castaneda, would say, all roads go to the same place. They all go nowhere. and some roads will have heart and some will not. And so following the path of heart is the essential thing we look for. And it is not necessarily the path of ease. So there's this concept I've talked about in life. You come to the crossroads, and you encounter these two possibilities. And one road is called bad trouble, and the other road is called good trouble. And we have to remember that trouble is not avoidable. But is it the kind of trouble we want to be getting into? Is it meaningful trouble? And so that would be the wound, turning towards the wound. The other thing about wounding is that when we cross a threshold into a new consciousness, or a new belief or a new behavior, where there's some kind of threshold crossing that could be developmental, psychological, spiritual. On the way to that crossroads, there are gatekeepers that we encounter that will challenge the crossing to see if we're really going to release this old patterning. And the purpose of the gatekeeper is, as I also call these gatekeepers, old ways of loving, because that's where they come from. The gatekeepers are entrenched old ways of loving and belonging that we outgrow. And then to cross into a new shift in consciousness, if you will, the old gatekeepers become nervous. And it's not about railing against yourself in some way or being angry about some part of yourself. It's actually about saying thank you. Thank you for helping me get here. Thank you for enabling me to survive those challenges, those traumas. And I bless you and I release you. I don't need you to run my life anymore, but I'm glad that you were there. Otherwise, I may not have made it. And so it's a different way of looking at the gatekeepers, the wound, the behaviors that come out of these old survival strategies. I don't believe we can truly let go of anything unless we bless it and extract the teaching, because these wounds offer teachings. That's why they stay active in our lives, is because we haven't accessed the medicine from them, the teaching that they carry. And until we do that, we just keep living a life of repetition. And so adjusting our relationship to the wound, and as I say, turning toward the night, entering the dark with a guide that has navigated the territory ahead of us, that knows something about what it's like to stand in the unknown without struggling to know something immediately. Just the experience of being in that place of not knowing. I was talking with a client the other day, and he sat down and he said, he'd been wrestling with this difficulty for about a year that I've been working with him. And he finally came in and he said, almost in tears, I don't know what to do anymore. And I thought in that moment, like, now you are ready. Now you're ready. Because those words of, I don't know what to do, are not about giving up. It's an invitation to grace, an invitation to the sacred, a prayer for assistance. It creates an opening. But it comes from going into, and looking deeply at the wound. And not from this immediate compulsory need to fix it, so that the symptoms and the trouble that it creates in my life go away. Because so I said these archetypal energies, if you will, or these that come into your life in the form of wounds or awaken, have no concern with this life that you've gotten comfortable with. They're not designed to help you stay the same. And we can see this happening on a global level, with where across time, like in the psyche, these energies will continue to polarize themselves until they get narrowed down into almost what appears to be two opposing forces. And it appears very much on the surface that the remedy and the antidote has to be the right one. And that's never, ever the remedy. The remedy is that how do we hold the tension of these opposing forces like birth contractions? We're being birthed. And if you stop that, it's like a cesarean section. It disrupts the life energy of something new emerging. And yet that's what we're being asked to do, is to hold the tension often of opposites, both in our own psyche and the difficulties we face and globally, until something new emerges. The third thing that we're not aware of, I believe, is coming through the young people. And the job of elders is to watch these young people and see what they're bringing in and help call it out, bring it out of them. So you say the word education comes from the Latin root word educare. And interestingly enough, it doesn't mean to fill you up with information that you can then function in this particular version of modernity that we've created. It means that the teacher's job is to draw forth from within you the genius, the genie, the medicine, that which you've come in with, because you've brought something here that we need, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So it's a different paradigm of looking at, not only youth, but of all people. It's like you carry something that we need on the planet, and we need to help you awaken to it or activate it. And that's the other gift in the sacredness of the wound, is that the wounds are designed to activate. I think maybe I said this earlier, activate the memories of the agreements you made with your ancestors before coming here about what you're bringing. And to be able to deliver that before you leave here would be a good thing. So that's one thought about that particular question you answered. Or asked, rather.
Well, it's an amazing big thought. It's a beautiful story. There are so many things to that, and I had so many visuals even while you were describing that I could resonate to myself, and especially the dark forest part, because it is always portrayed as the scary, you never come out again kind of image. But really, the darkness is where all the gold is, right? It's where all the wisdom, it's all the medicine. It's where everything is that you're searching for on the outside, exactly as you described. I love that. The part where the world is set up now to have us searching on the outside for that quick fix to make things better, when we're asking everyone to turn into that wound and and to look where all the gold is that you've been given. I love that. Thank you so much.
When COVID swept over the world as it did, and there was this kind of global response of kind of forcing people essentially to be still. Right. It's like we were globally, from my ceremonial rites of passage perspective, it's like everybody was put up on the mountain and said, sit, be still. And as you know, going up on the mountain, there's no guarantee that somebody will have a vision or have a soul connection or a calling. They can even spend the whole time up there distracting themselves. But it was curious that we somehow manifested this experience on the planet that forced this stillness. And we had a glimpse of of being invited into something, into a new story. And many people took that invitation, and you see some of those new stories starting to evolve in the world today, and others grab toward the past and say, we have to hang on to this. So it was just a curious thing that this thing that we called coronavirus was very possibly and likely what the Cherokee call a red dog. Meaning a red dog is a difficult teacher.
Oh, I love that.
And so there's all of a sudden we manifested this global red dog that came as this difficult, painful teacher that said, stop, be still, listen.
And so many people found their creative spark, and so many people had a complete different turnaround of their lifestyle, didn't they, in one way?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So many things came out of that.
Yeah.
Which actually leads me to another question for you. And I know you've answered in different ways, but I just want to bring this out there as well. There's this sense of madness that happens on the way to wholeness, and I'd love to dive into that a little bit, because it can be disturbing.
It's certainly not convenient.
No.
And it's, was the Al Gore statement years ago, the inconvenient truth, the inconvenient mad person,
Yes.
mad saints and the mad poets and the, the themes of madness.
There's always that little touch, right?
Right. And in some native cultures here, what they call the Hayoka, the coyote, the trickster. They presented themselves in a very non-linear, non-ordinary presentation. Could be labeled as madness, but often in these stories, the one that appears mad or a trickster is pointing to a truth that people are not willing to see, and they use absurdity or madness to point at it. And it's often one of the confusing things, like when people talk about trickster energy, it's, oh, you've run into coyote, so you're going to have lots of trickery things. How it's like the original understanding of the trickster was that it pointed to truth in an absurd way. And so that's one quality of what I'll call the madness, the mad genius, the mad, they're doing something in a very weird kind of way, but there's a truth to it. The other, why do we go mad on the way to wholeness? And again, to call upon that earlier quote when I spoke about Carolyn May saying, when you call upon the will of the spirit to intervene, and it intervenes, and it calls you forward into a life, but it requires you to examine all of the ways in your life, or all of the belief systems and circuitries of understanding that you're plugged into. It calls you to examine all of these things, and examine all of the ways in which you may be living a victim consciousness. And it requires stepping through that threshold, as I was talking about the gatekeepers earlier. When you cross those gates, there's always, speaking of wound, in stories, there's always a wounding that happens with the gatekeeper. Achilles got shot in the heel. Different stories where when one crosses, they're inflicted often in the lower part of the body. There's a slash, a gash, a mark, an arrow. There's a wounding that happens as they narrowly kind of get through. And it's the mark of the initiation. It's the mark of the passage. But the madness, to descend into the madness is to descend into the realm of where your belief structures are breaking down, and what's offered up are often experiences and things that you may have no frame of reference of how to organize the thoughts around them. Whether you start hearing voices or just feel disheveled and unable to function, it's at this place that is the dismantling of those old identities. And again, being able to go more deeply into, to navigate more clearly into it, to source from it what's trying to emerge, and not just seeing it pathologically. I recently had the opportunity to go to Paris, and I visited the Musée d'Orsay Museum, and was looking at all the Van Gogh paintings, and even I think there's an old song, Starry Night, that speaks of Van Gogh's difficulty, and I got to stand in front of the painting and play the song on my As I listened to it and I wept, and I thought, here's a man with such depth of sensitivity. He can't hardly be in this world. All he can do is paint about it. And it's part of where we get kind of the theme of the tormented artist. It's not necessary to be a tormented artist to have good work, but it does speak of this descent into madness in which something is excavated. A song, a poem, a new idea. But it does require the dismantling, the surrendering, the letting go. And it requires what I call making yourself available to grace or being touched by the sacred. You are not meant to traverse the territory of the descent under your own resourcefulness and intellect and willpower. If you did, you would not have made a clear passage of initiation. If you're not broken down, broken open, there will not be much of a breakthrough. Often there'll just be a repetition of something old. But to go to that place where you feel broken down and broken open, that you turn outside yourself and offer a tear, a prayer, a request, and I don't know what to do here, as a prayer. Like in those moments, I believe we make ourselves available to grace, but even that we can't choreograph or control because it has its own entering and exiting. But we've maybe also had those moments in our lives where we've been in that place, in a heap on the floor, in grief, and just I don't know what to do here. And then something happens. Maybe it's the next day, maybe it's 3 days. I've had that experience many times where something that was waiting on me apparently to get there shifted out there, that I seemingly had nothing to do with, other than that I was willing to go here. and it's in those in the wound, in the dark, in those places where we're most available to grace. And I use that language. I say where we are most available to connect with something greater than ourselves, the thing that cannot be named very well. So madness as a part of the descent of the, as I say, we're descending into what do we descend, and you get to the bottom and there's a breakdown. Has to be a breakdown before there can be a breakthrough. And it can look like madness. It can look like a very non-functioning, disheveled self in some way. And again, the danger would be if we only looked at it as bad trouble rather than good trouble, and tried to medicate it or to make the symptoms stop so that we could go back to functioning as we were.
Which I think is where some people get stuck, don't they? Because they're reaching out for help in that same, how do I fix this where I am now, rather than obviously knowing other
how to navigate in through it. And I give myself the liberty to say what I'm getting ready to say because I've been in the field of psychotherapy for over 35 years. But we often end up going into the office of people with that quandary that are simply just better at hiding their turmoil than we are. And we look to them, and rather than, and I won't say that about all of them, but also but being able to sit with a true guide that doesn't see it as something that needs fixing, but more navigating, and help us mythologize our own wound and darkness that often comes from very real experiences. I don't want to negate that many people are victimized by quite significant traumas, and yet the the call toward healing is the call to reconcile, and to source from it something of medicine or gift that we can carry forth by how we live. I like to tell people that when they tell me these stories and they get stuck in this place of, like, why did that happen? And I like to say, why has nothing to do with what happened before here. Why has everything to do with what you're going to do with it. So that we can only know why this happened if we come back here in 20 years and you tell me what you've done with your life, and then we'll know why. So this, I had a native teacher, Will Rocking-Bear, that used to call it walking backwards in life. He said, when you walk backwards, you end up living from a place of woundology, and you're focused back there constantly beyond the time that you need to, and you move through life backwards. He said, but if you can access the wound and shift it so that it becomes an initiatory responsibility, as opposed to a woundology of lack or difficulty, then you now carry, because of that, you now carry this initiated responsibility of how you direct your life forward and what you now do, and that becomes the why. And yet there is a period where we need to go down, to look back, to excavate, to unravel, to formulate some understanding that in time has more to do with where we're going than where we've been. And that takes time, it's but the wound holds all of that. It holds all of that light. I think now about I spend a lot of time outdoors, and recently we had the full moon here, and I was out looking at the moon, and I saw the full moon, and I thought about how the new moon looks, and I called up the image, and with the new moon, you can see just the edges of the light, and so there's this reminder during the dark moon, when there's nothing on this side, no light on this side, but you do see this kind of outline of light on the other side. There's a reminder that Grandmother Moon offers us as a teaching, that there is a light that's present we cannot see. And there is a value, another teaching that Grandmother Moon offers us, there is a value in embracing shadow and looking into the shadow and going into the dark and coming out into the light. And so I think of that teaching over and over, so that Grandmother Moon teaches us about how to own those shadowy things that we would sometimes rather not talk about, that we feel shame or guilt or trauma or difficulty about, and look into the dark and bring it into the light. And so it's every cycle, every lunar cycle, it shows us we go into the dark and we come back into the light, and into the dark and back into the light. And so it's nature holds every antidote for every illness of the psyche. If we just know how to find it, know where to look, or at least let it find us. If we sit still long enough in nature, you'll be found by it.
Yes. And as you said, all the reminders are there, aren't they? With the moon and the sun, all the cycles. Right. Everything is placed to keep reminding us how it's all working.
Yeah, that's why the ancient cosmologies of understanding one's relationship to all the realms were always anchored in the seasons and in nature. That's I think of that which comes out of the planet, for like where one lives and how they orient themselves to the directions on where you live, and the seasons that follow those directions, and the plants that grow in those places. And so the cosmologies of understanding of those ancient peoples were always anchored in the seasons, in the earth, in the directions. And from each place, there are reflections of that which we carry. So the medicine we carry when you turn towards the rising sun, the place of new beginnings, and the place of seeing for the first time every time, and the place of letting go of those old stories, and beginning anew, or turns towards the noonday sun, with the call to action, the call to activity and passion and playfulness and movement and dance, like the energy of the noon sun, and then the turning towards the setting sun, and then this turning inward into the season of autumn, the season of harvest, where we begin to harvest the fruits, and then turning into the dark, and turning into this other season, where we let go. And so the seasons in nature are always mirrored for us how to be in relationship with ourselves and each other and the cosmos.
Yeah, that's perfect.
You can't have, without going through the dark, you don't get the light. You can't just jump over it.
No. I'm sure we've all tried.
Right. Or to keep it kind of, what they call it, kind of the endless season of brightness and sunshine.
Right.
It's like, we'll keep that going.
Doesn't work that way, does it?
Right. Well, we're taught that through, like, hang on to your youth, hang on to your the image of yourself at whatever age is that you say you're where you mark getting older.
Yes. Yeah.
But they're to see incredibly elegant, beautiful, wise elders. You look at them and say they embody youth, like you can see it in them.
Right.
And then they haven't rejected any, they say the lines in your face only go where the smiles have been.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And
you can see their soul alive in them as well. That's the thing. The difference is their soul is beaming.
Yeah. They're rich with stories and experience. And I always think of the storylines in our hands and in our faces when we see the elders, like, wow, there's a story. There's many stories this person carries. Many, just that these things represent, the wisdom and the stories of a life lived. And you don't get to be an elder without hardship. You can get old, but that doesn't make you an elder. But to become an elder requires one really to face the difficulties and the challenges, and have those moments of madness encountered, that brings one to the substance of being an elder, the necessity of the wound. I'll say one more thing about kind of the necessity of wounding. I call it a necessity, because in mythology show us this, that naivety has to be betrayed. You have to experience betrayal. And who are we betrayed by but people we love? Otherwise it wouldn't be a betrayal, right? So I have a friend that he has a way of saying it, a friend of mine, when he says, if somebody says, I really want to connect with you, be friends, he said, well, just know if we become friends, I'm going to one day betray you. Because he's steeping that deeper message that if we connect deeply, there'll be a day where I do something that hurts you. And I may not even mean to, but I will. And so in many stories, there's the necessity of the betrayal of naivety, because it activates entering the dark night. There's an old story out of New Guinea, Africa, that I share a lot about, called the Nubian woman. And in the village, she's as a young woman who feels disconnected from her peers. And then in an attempt to fit in, she has traded in her being authentic self. And in a moment of wanting to fit in, she experiences this huge betrayal that sends her into the dark night and eventually down into the river, in which she encounters an old river hag, full that has cuts and wounds and bruises all over her. And the old river hag looks at her and says, "Lick my wounds." And being who she is, this Nubian girl in the story at this moment, she knows she's not in the ordinary world. She's at the bottom of a river, and there's an old river hag, and she's tending a fire. This is not the ordinary world, so she steps even closer. And she picks up the arm, and she begins to lick the wounds of the old river hag. And then the wounds slowly begin to heal. This light shines forth in the old woman and heals. These wounds seal up. And then the old river hag stands up and scoops the girl up in her hands, like this big, huge, river hag, and scoops her up. And then the girl starts to feel uncomfortable and starts to wiggle and squirm. And soon that wiggling and squirming turns into frustration. And then frustration turns into anger, and then anger into rage. And all this rage begins to pour forth. The old river hag holds fast, with fierce compassion. All this anger coming out. We say so much anger that the girl doesn't even know where it's all coming from. Maybe it's not even all hers. Maybe it had lived in the lines of her ancestors until this moment. She didn't know, but it's all coming through her now. And then eventually the settling of the water, the troubled waters, and her anger settles down in the quiet. And then it's silence, and the river hag still holding her. And then we say, and then there was one, and then two, and then dozens, thousands of tears begin to pour forth from the girl. And so much grief. We said the river rose 3 feet that day. And she didn't know where all this grief was coming from. Maybe it was not even hers. Maybe it had lived in her lineage for hundreds of years, but she didn't know it was just moving through her now, all this grief. And the old river hag held fast. When that settled, and the grief quieted, and then back to silence, the old river hag set the girl down. And the girl, feeling a little disheveled, having been mad, it's like, whoa. She started to say something, and then there was a sound in the river. We say, the sound in the river. And this river demon was coming up. And the old river hag says, quick, into this lodge. And the girl goes into this earthen lodge, and she closes the lodge door, and the river demon comes up and says, I smell the blood and bones of someone in my river, and I want them. They're mine. And the river hag looks at the river demon and just laughs, says, I don't know where she went. She was here yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, and she left heading east pretty fast. Well, no, wait a minute. It was west or south. Hell, I don't know. I'm just kind of old. I don't remember where she went and how fast, but she was moving fast, right? She's gone. You'll have to run if you're going to catch her. And the river demon took off. And then the old woman raises the flap, and the girl comes out, and she's standing once again, and she wants to say something about thank you for the healing and the protection. And she starts to speak, and the river hag claps her hands, and out of the river she comes before she can utter a word, lands on the bank of the river. And she's a little unstable, the way you feel unstable when you've been in that other world, trying to remember something about who you are, trying to remember something that may have been stolen or lost or naively given away. And she finds her footing. And then out of the river comes this necklace that lands on the bank beside of her. Different than the necklace she threw into the river in the beginning when she experienced the betrayal. And she notices that this is her medicine, and she puts it on, and she makes her way back towards the village. And when she gets back at the village, where she doesn't know if she's been gone a week, an hour-long interview, or 20 years. But she comes back to the village, and she sees the girls again playing down at the water, and she walks out, and they heads spin around, and they look towards her, and they say, where did you get that necklace? We want one of those. That's amazing. Did you get that from like Sundance catalog or something? Where can we get a necklace like that? And she says, I got this from the spirit of the river. And they ran toward the river, and she said, wait, but it was too late, and they had jumped. And down, down, down they went. And when the silt settled on the bottom of the river, and they looked across, saw this old woman stirring the coals of this fire and keeping it hot. And they went over and they said, "Oh, woman, where can we get one of those necklaces?" And the old woman looked up and, she said, "Lick my wounds." And they looked and they noticed the old woman had these scars and wounds and bruises. And they said, "Oh, you're gross. We're not touching you. We just want one of those necklaces. Tell us where we can get that and we'll be out of here." Well, "Lick my wounds" is all the old woman said. And they said, "Well, we're not touching you, old woman. We're leaving." And they took off, walking away, turned their back on the old woman. And then they heard, and they turned, "What's that? What's that?" And the old woman said, "That's the river demon. I guess you better run because the river demon smells you down in here." And they took off running. And the story says they took off running into lives of compulsions and addictions and obsessions and distractions and psychic numbing, running, afraid to tend to those wounds, afraid to lick the wounds, and they're still running. But back in that village, there walked the woman, anchored in her medicine and standing clear and strong in who she is. And she built her lodge in that village. And from her vantage point, she would look at all the people in the village, and then she would notice when they grew to that place of betwixt and between, when you're no longer where you were, but you're not where you're going, you're in that betwixt between place. She would take them down to the river and teach them how to listen to the river. And some would listen to the river and then come back muttering things like, "Oh, that woman's crazy. We don't know what she's talking about." Others would go down to the river and disappear and never be seen again because maybe they're now running from their demons. And yet others would go down to the river and disappear. And then maybe it was a week, a month, a year, 5 years, somebody would appear in the village carrying some sacred language, some holy elixir, some sacred dance or language that they could offer. And they built their lodge. And so the story goes like that. So it speaks, it's an old, as I say, it's a story out of New Guinea, Africa, and it speaks of the descent into the realm of the watery depths and encountering the wound. Mm-hmm. And the old woman carrying that carries the scars and the cuts and the wounds and the bruises. When you initially see her, it looks horrendous, but if you tend to those wounds, we see there's great healing and great wisdom and the memory of the medicine that one carries when they return. So that's the sacred embrace of those wounds in that particular story.
What an amazing, beautiful, powerful medicine story. I'm honored that you have shared that, Kedar, and it's probably the most perfect way to round up our conversation, that you've covered so much of what this theme is actually telling and helping people to understand. So thank you. That's beautiful.
Quite welcome.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I had just picture it too. It was really.
I told it very quickly. There is a version of that story that I have online. You can listen to the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay.
But,
well, that is a perfect place to round up our conversation. It's been incredible, and you've covered so many things. I think what's very important as well is that you have I want people to know where they can find you, your services, what you offer, and of course you have a free gift for everyone that is available to them. So
you can only find me in the dark woods.
Fabulous. Good.
On the edge of the water. Staring at the black water, saying, "Plunge in, plunge in."
I love it.
But other than that, you can find me online at www.rightsofpassagecouncil.org. I'm sure you'll have it listed somewhere.
It will be listed, yes.
And then the free gift offering.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, the free gift, A Story to the Center of Soul, is what you're offering.
Is the story of the initiatory journey,
mm-hmm.
of remembering, and called Singing Stone.
Oh.
And I tell the story using a drum.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's a beautiful
Lovely.
story of the walking the medicine wheel and remembering who one is.
Lovely. Yeah, that'll be lovely for everyone to go onto your website. You've got so many fabulous resources and free things as well, and a good list of your services. So I highly recommend people to go online and have a look, and definitely go for your story. I mean, medicine stories are just amazing. They're just so powerful, aren't they? Like,
Yeah.
well, they definitely speak to the soul. I love them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and amazing wisdom and learning. So you've literally summed up the whole summit. That's it. We don't need any more. You've kind of explained everything.
I saw you have so many wonderful people. I can't wait to see what they have to say.
So thank you.
Thank you so much.